All right, so two more presentations left to go in this session. I'm sure a bunch of you will be extremely excited for our next one. We are very fortunate to welcome Sudeep and Will from Droga 5 to the stage to talk about the relevance or irrelevance of social media.
Hi there, my name's Sudeep.
And I'm Will, hello.
I'm the CEO of Droga 5 and a strategy guy by trade.
And I'm the CEO of a digital agency in Sydney called Feeling and also the head digital strategist at Droga 5.
So we're going to talk to you a little bit about the evolution of communications and the relevance of social media, for want of a better word. And I think the reality of it is that we talk a lot about this space having changed a lot over the past few years. And let's, if we think about it a little bit like this, a lot has changed, and there's been a lot of challenges that we, as people that work with brands on a daily basis, are facing, you know, day in, day out. One of the biggest challenges, however, is that the world has got way more complicated, and it's very, very difficult to actually cut through and actually have an ongoing conversation with a brand. So if you look at this chart, for example, and this is obviously out of date because it goes to 2000 and something, but the interesting thing with this is that, you know, it's one thing to say that a lot's changed, but when you look at it, you realize that the rate of change has been exponential over the last 20 years or so. And now the number of channels that are available for any business or brand to communicate with people is at a level which has never existed in the past. The interesting thing is that, you know, this chart finishes in 2008, and the biggest change that we've seen since then is really the rise of social media and actually the way that we use social media. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Before we do that, however, there's a piece that we think is really important in this conversation, which is about the importance of popular culture. And this might sound a little bit rhetorical, but given the fact that we spend our day talking about marketing, brands, social media and communications, it's easy to forget that there's a big piece of world out there that we often don't really pay much attention to. Now, the reality of it is that, and actually the unfortunate thing if you work in any marketing or advertising industry, is that consumers are very, very good at running away from the messages that we create. So we spend hours and hours trying to carefully craft a communication strategy and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, most people ignore everything that we do. And, you know, a good example of this is how little or how few people actually click on a piece of digital communication, for example. Like display advertising, which was meant to be the great white hope for people advertising wankers like Will and myself, you know, literally less than 0.02% of any digital advertising actually gets clicked on. And the fascinating thing even with that is that that's not very much, but when you think about it, 8% of internet users actually account for 85% of the clicks that are done out there. So the reality of it is that most people just ignore this stuff, and they're getting better and better at ignoring this stuff. So if they're ignoring the stuff that we're creating, that's slightly depressing, but I mean, what are they actually doing instead of that? Well, what they're really doing is they're running towards the stuff that we sit on the tertiary of, which is popular culture. And it's infinitely harder to actually try and create a piece of popular culture than it is any piece of marketing or advertising. And that's why, that having been said, we actually believe that being part of popular culture is actually more important than marketing. So no matter how good your marketing is, popular culture will always be more appealing for consumers. And so therefore, we spend a lot of time actually trying to figure out how do we create messages and communications and conversations that actually fit within this world of popular culture. So that being said, there's another really interesting angle which I think we'd love to take on this, which is the notion of influence and how popular culture in its entirety actually influences the way that we behave and how it actually influences what we think and do. This example is either going to be slightly depressing or slightly amusing, depending on which way you look at it.
It's depressing.
It is a bit depressing. So if you think about where, over the years, in 100-year blocks, where influence came from when people were pregnant and they were going to have a baby. So back in the 19th century, predominantly, where you would get advice from and where you would actually learn what the best way of raising your child would be via church and state. And this was evidenced by the types of names that were very popular then. So they were very biblical names, James, Mary, etc. Then if you fast forward to the 20th century, you start to notice that the influence or the kind of scope of where names were coming from was much broader and more interesting. And you know, the primary source of information was family and friends. So names like Sophia and William became very popular as we started to look slightly further afield. And this is the slightly depressing bit, I guess, which is if you think about the 21st century, you're just as likely to get parenting advice from Kim Kardashian or Miranda Kerr as you are from church and state or your family and friends. And in particular, these two names up here, Elsa and Dexter, are amongst the two most popular boys and girls names over recent times, over last year. So if you ever needed any further evidence that popular culture has a huge impact on the way that we think, they're interesting names.
I told you it was depressing.
So one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is, okay, it's one thing for us to talk about influence being important and popular culture being really important, but how do we actually use that in the work that we create and you know, the types of campaigns that we create for businesses and brands? The interesting thing when I think about influence is that actually influence is a topic of conversation, has been around for a very long time. So this book was written in 1984, and no one in this room has probably read this book. In fact, no one in advertising has even really read this book. And it's written by a guy called Robert Cialdini, and it's actually based on about 35 years worth of research and analysis into the world of influence. And he talks about the 6 fundamental strategies for businesses and brands to create influence. Actually, in his book, he talks about the weapons of influence, and the weapons of influence have been used back in the times of war and all that kind of stuff. And they are reciprocity, liking, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, and scarcity. But when we think about the world that we're living in at the moment, and particularly social media, there are 3 of these which are particularly important. And it's interesting, if I just started with these 3 words, liking, proof, or social proof, and authority, it could have been a presentation just about social media. The reality of it is that these words or these thoughts have been around for a very long time. I'll just give you a quick example of how they work in the modern era, and we'll kind of go through it from there. So the first is liking, and the question really is, you know, how can we create influence through showing our target that we care about them? And on the left-hand side of the page, the screen rather, there's a little tattoo there which is from Lady Gaga, and for those of you that are familiar with Lady Gaga and her world, she refers to herself as the monster mother, and she refers to her fans as little monsters. So there's this whole relationship that they have all around the fact that they share a common language and a common name for each other. The example on the right is some work that we did out of North America, which is all for a financial services business called Prudential. And what the idea of this campaign was, we found 10,000 stories of people that were retiring on a particular day to demonstrate that this brand really understood what it was like. So actually showing, you know, a degree of empathy. The second is this notion of social proof, and the simplest way to understand this one is really how do we help our brands generate and demonstrate a following so that others do? And a really easy way to kind of get your head around this is, if you think about someone telling you about an amazing restaurant, it doesn't really make any difference how good that restaurant is. If there's never anyone in it, you'll never want to go. If it's too easy to get in, you just walk in straight in, it makes you question whether or not, you know, it's a good place to be. And that's why places have lines and waiting lists and all that kind of stuff. And then finally is this notion of authority. And authority has been used by many businesses and brands to actually give themselves a greater sense of who they are. And here are 2 examples here. You would actually think that scrambling an egg is pretty straightforward and that anyone should be able to do it. But a video of Gordon Ramsay illustrating how you scrambled eggs has got over 9 million views on YouTube. And there's hundreds and hundreds of these kinds of videos, probably thousands. And even if you think about it from a brand perspective, you know, the fact that Jamie Oliver is the spokesman for Woolworths probably says a lot more, true or not true, about the freshness of their food than any piece of advertising or marketing that you can create. So if you think about those 3 themes, we think that they're really important as you start to understand what we can actually do in the world of social media and communications in general.
So in the context of influence and evolution of the way we communicate, let's turn our attention specifically to social media. We've got a A few things coming up here before we get into some case studies. I suppose the first section is a little bit of a weighty, high-end concept that we share in common with a buddy of ours in LA, and then we have some sort of really executable, practical stuff for social media. So how do you go forward, Sudeep? That well?
Yes.
Thank you. This is our buddy Oliver Luckett. He's the CEO of The Audience. It's the most successful social media business in the world, and we share similar views, or Sudeep and I share very similar views with him, particularly when it comes to social and how you should interact with it. Simply, we have the opinion or the concept that Facebook is like a living organism living in a petri dish, and that all the bright spots you can see out there are influences and connections, and it's our job as marketers to reach the endpoints of these connections with our communications and interact with them. And understanding this implicitly allows for effective social media execution. And it's imperative to know what content works and how that content is shared with and how it is amplified. So everything in life needs to be nourished, as does the digital world. And creating a large amount of content feeds the system and nourishes it in the right way. And external nutrients from the rest of the world, like phones and cameras, build and feed content to reflect the outside world. So like all living organisms, Facebook has an immune system. If you don't watch your step, you'll be hidden, unfollowed, reported, blocked. Before we go on to our practical stuff, it's important to look closely at this high concept and understand that if we're going to move forward in social media and doing effective work, it's Sudeep and I believe that you need to treat the internet and Facebook specifically as a living organism and nurture it and respect it. So we thought we'd cover off a couple of really practical rules for working in Facebook, and we have two sort of never forget rules that Sudeep and I work by every day. Sorry, I'm going forward on that, not on that, sorry, got confused. And those two rules refer directly to how social media actually works. So we believe that for brands, social media is the point at which a creative idea turns into a conversation. I suppose you're all aware of this concept. You put your creative idea out into the ether of the internet, and it's the first point at which people can interact live with it by creating a conversation, liking, sharing, reacting. So it's the intersection of what you wish to say and what your consumers want to talk to you about. The second concept is that social media is a living organism, as we just covered, and it needs to be treated as such. So as such, it needs to be fed, nourished, and nurtured. And if you follow these three steps like a Bible, your social media will grow and evolve. And by converse, traditional media is something you can just set and forget. A billboard, for example. So we have 4 social media fundamentals for brands. These are sort of like the hard and fast rules of how we work. They're important to look at. They're quite simple, but I think that a lot of brands sort of forget that working in the internet space, you're actually dealing with humans, and as we said, it's the point at which your brand message becomes a conversation, so you have to respect it. First up, you're not competing with other brands, you're competing with people's friends. We've all got annoying friends that share cat memes, and that's also a problem for brands who are trying to get their message, however big or small, across the internet. Look at that guy there, he's having a great time. But basically, you have to compete against people's friends, and quite honestly, your friends' messages are more exciting and probably more important than a brand. So if you are going to interrupt people's day, you've got to remember who you're up against, and you're up against people that have real connections. Secondly, you've got to give yourself permission to shine. So what that means, in summary, is you need a reason to talk, you need a reason to be there. If you're disingenuous and people can tell that what you're talking about is sort of half-assed, or you haven't really thought through your strategy and your creative properly, people know you don't have permission to be there, and they'll just swipe straight past you. Thirdly, authenticity is not a goal, sorry. It's an essential. That's the most authentic guy in the world, in Sudeep, in my humble opinion. People have very finely tuned bullshit radars, excuse my French. People can tell straight away if you're there for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. People are editing content with their eyes all day, every day, as they stare into their phones for a shocking amount of time every day. So authenticity has to be at the root of everything everybody does all of the time. If you're not authentic, just forget doing work in social media, especially if you're a brand. Next up, disrupt at your own peril. This harks back to the last point about being authentic, but I think it lends to my concept that, what is the right budget to spend, and where should you be putting your budget and behind what message. If you're going to blast your message out to people because you've got a much bigger budget than other people's friends and you're a big company, you're disrupting people's days. So you are at a big risk of turning people into enemies of your brand when they were once a fan. So I think it's important to always disrupt at your own peril and have a close look at why you're sending your message out in the first place. Sudeep, we're going to go to some case studies now. There's 3. I think we have time to get through them all.
Yep.
One of them's a perfect storm, which is the Swedish House Mafia, and then one of them's put together by our buddy Oliver from the audience, and then one of them was put together by RACD at Droga 5, Steve Cole, and it's called The World's Strongest Arm.
So this first one, so this hopefully will start to try and draw some of these themes together that we've been talking about. So even the most successful TV campaigns that are created, old world campaigns, would not reach 45 million people, right? So there's no way, well, this country at least, that you would be able to get one message out to a big group of people. And actually, more than that, you'd definitely not be able to get them to actually engage with that campaign in a meaningful manner. This is a really interesting one because this is probably the most successful marketing campaign that Absolute Vodka's ever done. And it's off the back of the Swedish House Mafia, who no longer exist, but it was for a music video they created for a song called Greyhound. Now that song Greyhound has been viewed over 47 million times on YouTube, which is not unusual for a music video. However, what is unusual is that the actual idea for the song came from a brand, and I'll show you this little video and then I'll come back and talk to you a little bit about how actually that was converted to business results.
Turn it up, let's dance.
This record is a collaboration with us on Absolute. We're working on this brand new track with the Swedish House Mafia.
The process is just like it is always when we work together. It's sounds flying everywhere.
As soon as you put a kick drum into a room, something happens. It can be an empty room with nothing in. As soon as you go with a kick drum, you know that something is going on. It has a big connection, I think, dance music and drinks.
Okay, so that's the hype reel. If you actually go search for Swedish House Mafia Greyhound, you can see the music video. They basically made a music video with these robotic greyhound dogs in a race and whatever. But I think the interesting thing is that, so the Facebook activity alone generated over 70 million engagements, so people actually sharing it, not just looking at it, not impressions, but actual engagements of people moving this stuff around, showing it to their friends, etc., etc. But I think more significantly, this was done around the time of their farewell tour. So they did a 50-day farewell tour around the world, and the #1 drink sold, selling the next closest selling drink 5-1, was the Greyhound, which is basically pink grapefruit juice and vodka. So, off a $9 million deal, which is what Absolute paid to the guys, they would have made hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of actually selling vodka, and then beyond that, the brand effects were even more exponential. And I think the interesting thing with this was that it was one of those bits that really understood, these guys have a huge social media following, we know that their fans love the music, and if we can tie all of that stuff together with a product story at the end of it, or within it, it actually could lead to something very successful, which it was.
So next up we have Dove Real Beauty, which is put together by the audience in the US. Have you guys seen this one before? It's kind of a pretty popular case study in terms of social media. The reason being it's the most successful piece of social media work of all time. The long form video has been viewed 70 million times. But in the spirit of nurturing and feeding the piece of content, over 1,000 pieces of custom content were actually created by people who interacted with the campaign. And the estimated audience for this, when all is said and done, is well over 182 million people globally. And it increased the brand awareness of Dove by 150% pretty easily. So we'll watch the video.
Dove has this mission of turning beauty into a source of confidence and not anxiety for a long time. The brand has always been about real women. What was really like a tipping point was around 2004 with Campaign for Real Beauty. And the latest part of this campaign is Real Beauty Sketches. Only 4% of the women in the planet think that they are beautiful. And it was really just an idea to bring an FBI-trained sketch artist and show the contrast between how women see themselves and how others see.
She looks closed off and fatter, sadder too. The second one looks more open, friendly, and happy.
Hearing people describe themselves, maybe there's something about a feature that they don't really like about themselves. And I can sense that, you know, they're kind of treading lightly on that.
We brought the best brains that we could reach from Google, from YouTube specifically, to have a conversation about how to find what were the best ways for more people to engage with the content. Conversations on YouTube to keep feeding the interest on the video. There are lots of people who come to me to say how many different times they have watched the video already. We are getting so much traction on YouTube. I mean, there are some incredibly large numbers. The intent was to create brand love and translate that brand love in a longer-term relationship between the audience and the brand. We need to take risks and try to create even more content that will be meaningful to people.
So the final example that we'll show before we close, before we give some concluding thoughts, is actually a piece of work that our partner worked on, Steve Cole, called The Most Powerful Arm. And this was a campaign that was done for muscular dystrophy. And the interesting thing with this campaign is it's the first time that an online petition, as a result of this campaign, the first time that an online petition's actually been presented to the government, which is interesting. The whole thing was done on Facebook, so there was no traditional media around this, so not a dollar spent anywhere in any other mediums at all. And on top of that, it had a 48% conversion rate, so almost half of the people that actually saw this campaign engaged with it, which is incredibly high if you think about any of the campaigns. Well, it's incredibly high if I think about any of the campaigns I've ever worked on. Obviously, it's a very worthy message, but it's a really great way of using technology and really leveraging that notion of social proof. So it actually takes it a step further than any of the other examples that we could come up with. So I'll show you this video.
Dear Prime Minister, I'm one of thousands of young Australians with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. My heart and breathing muscles are failing, and my arms are so weak I can no longer lift a pen. Eventually, it will take my life. Clinical trials are the only hope we have, but we need the money to fund them. Can you please help us? Signed, Jacob Lancaster.
Charities Save Our Sons and the Duchenne Foundation needed to find a way to bring DMD to the attention of the Australian government, but we needed a way to stand out. Constructed out of laser-cut bamboo and 3D printed joints, we built the world's first petition-signing robot, asking the government to bring clinical trials to Australia. We asked 19-year-old DMD sufferer Jacob Lancaster to be the face of the campaign. And to make the arm even more powerful, we gave it Jacob's handwriting, sampled from the last thing he was able to write, a Mother's Day card. With zero paid media to spend, we relied on free television, radio, press, and online publicity to direct users to the fully responsive campaign website. Entirely driven by Facebook, we used their analytics system to authenticate and verify supporter details. As well as streaming live video of the signings, a photo of the user's signature was instantly uploaded from the site to their Facebook wall. The arm then toured as a public installation so people could see their signature firsthand, prompting others to sign using their phones. The campaign resulted in over 6.7 million Facebook impressions and over 32,000 signatures, with an astonishing 48% conversion rate. Each user clocked an average dwell time of over 2.5 minutes. A scroll of over 32,000 signatures was presented to the Australian government in Canberra, making it the most successful health-related petition ever, becoming the first Facebook petition to be officially tabled by the Senate. All of this giving much-needed hope to boys suffering from DMD.
So, in conclusion, I guess if only we had a crystal ball and we could actually predict what the future might look like, we probably wouldn't be standing here. We'd be in a big yacht somewhere or in a helicopter or something like that. But that said, I think there are a couple of things that I think are absolutely true and things that we've observed over the last 10, 15 years working in the industry. The first is that this is never going to happen again, right? So the idea that we will all sit around at a point in time, around a TV screen or some other kind of screen, at a particular point in time and have a commercial message shoved down our throat, you know, those days are long gone. So as a result of that, it brings with it challenges which I think we need to be thinking about, and we need to be evolving the way that we talk to people about. So at the end of the day, something like this is definitely true. People will definitely have less time on their hands and more messages to deal with. At the end of the day, as we've noticed, they're becoming better and better at filtering those things out. So what that means is that we really need to develop more engaging and more effective communications, but that, as a job, is going to become harder and harder. And I think the prize that's up for grabs, however, is if we do that properly, and we do actually make that leap and actually end up with work that either using influence or actually thinking about the way the social sphere really works, you can end up in a much better spot. Hopefully that means that we have happy consumers that are not running away from our messages and actually are engaging with them and actually consuming them in the same way that they consume other aspects of popular culture. And I was speaking at a conference in Adelaide a little while ago, and there was a futurist called Christina who was speaking before me, and I got into a conversation with her about, well, how do you become a futurist, and how do futurists figure out what the future is all about? And I'll leave this, a thought that she gave me with you as a final thought. She basically talked about the fact that, you know, the things that will be important in the future are things that were important in the past, but we no longer care about. So this notion that nothing new really exists, as with those weapons of influence that were written in the 1930s or 50s, as the case may be. But all we need to do is look backwards, almost, to look forwards and try and understand, you know, the shape of the world and how we can find the answers to the problems that we're trying to solve, even if they are advertising wanky problems and stuff like that. Thanks very much.
So they say that 80% of statistics are made up on the spot. You mentioned earlier something like 80% of clicks are from 8% of people, something roughly like this. Yeah. When was that stat created, and how was it yielded?
Conversion rates, mostly. So, I mean, on Facebook, you get 0.02 conversion rate on most media spends, and the digital world, it's even less. And I mean, I don't work in the world of banner advertising anymore, but I would hate to look at the statistics. Yeah,
good to get out of that. So, leaping from that to the max hype world of virtual reality, augmented reality now, how do you compare that old world of clicks to this new world of immersion, and how strong that is in engagement?
Sudeep, you got anything? We don't really work in that sort of stuff, to be perfectly honest, because I suppose we work with bigger brands who want to do messages that translate to big audiences online. We'd love to do more of that stuff. I don't know enough about the virtual reality world and augmented reality. I do want an Oculus Rift. I do want to play with one, but I don't know really.
How do we manage our own brand, as in what, personally or from an agency perspective? From an agency perspective, it's about, I think the simplest thing for us is it's about authenticity, right? So it's very easy to, you know, come up with thoughts and stuff and all the rest of it. But A, I think you've got to believe in it genuinely, and B, you've got to practice what you preach. So, you know, if you were a client of ours, you'd hear the same stuff that we talk about day to day with our friends in boardrooms or in, you know, rooms like this as well.
To that question though, just quickly, I was thinking when Cate was answering then, back to what I was saying about having permission to shine. I mean, with Droga 5, it's important to have a presence online. But I own a digital agency called Feeling as well, and we are in the business of media buying and running social profiles for influencers and brands. We don't have a Facebook, and you know, I probably would never set one up. And I'm in the process of dumbing down our quite complex website into just a holding page, because at the end of the day, what's my point of being on there? I'm in the business of helping brands and clients out, not myself. So I don't even have a Facebook page for my company.
I just had one question, and tell me off if it's not truly relevant. I was wondering about the advent of new platforms like Hello, which are deliberately shunning the role of advertising in social media. Is that a short-lived phenomenon, or do you think the future is driving people away from the engagement of advertisers in social media?
I don't think we've seen anything out of Elo that we need to see yet. Like, I think it's really good. I think the UI is still really bad. I think it's still early days, but I mean, it started off the back of counterculture needing somewhere to be themselves, right? Transsexual people was where it started. So I think in terms of Elo and commercialisation and whether or not it's going to be short-lived or whether it's ever going to have brands on it, I don't think we know the answer yet. I think it's a fantastic thing because there is that section of, you know, the section of culture that doesn't want to be on Facebook is on Elo, so it has its place. But I think we're still in the very early days for that. And I also think that they'll probably get cannibalised by people with better UI eventually.
One great big thank you to Sudeep and Will for coming and sharing.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.